In this video, all that you have been waiting for would resolve. The Second World War would start, but be drastically changed from the one in our timeline. This is because the video is part of a series called Project Kaisertum about Germany winning the Great War by capturing Paris in 1914. The politics of France in this alternate timeline are similar to the ones of ultranationalist Germany, but the key difference is that there is no appeasement for France. The French cannot demand any land without having a coalition to form against them, and even with the help of the Russians and the Hungarians, they would have to back down. Last episode, Austria-Hungary and Illyria collapsed, so Germany took the opportunity to integrate Austria, which didn't go well in France. This is because the Axis of Revenge knew that Germany would outscale them soon, which is why the French initiated this war this early on. The French gave an ultimatum to Germany, and when the Germans refused, war was brought to all of these countries. Let me tell you how this war would finish. This is a super heavy tank that France has been producing, and they have around 1000 when the war rolls around. The ultimate gamble is that France needs to build them once and they can be used indefinitely. As of right now, France doesn't know if Germany has a counter to this weapon, so it's a big gamble for the French. Technology would progress and make these tanks obsolete if France were to delay the war. The French also have a solid strategy, which consists of taking the city of Strasbourg, which would greatly boost morale in France, but also to cross the Rhine River, so they can later expand into Germany proper. After this is secured, the French would relocate these tanks and go along the Maas River, where they can split Belgium into two and take the undefended half. This is a big gamble for the French and the Russians, so let's see if this would pay off. You can actually try the same in the Hearts of Iron 4 mod based in this series, where you can play as France and try to destroy Germany, which is plenty of fun. As I said, these are just the plans for the French army, so let me tell you how they would be executed. On the 3rd of January 1932, there would be big fog in the province of Alsace-Lorraine, which is perfect for the French, as the Germans cannot spot the super heavy tanks just yet. Then, out of nowhere, the tanks would advance toward the city of Strasbourg, destroying everything in their way. The Germans would perform poorly, as they didn't expect to be at war this soon, but also because of suboptimal weather conditions. There is going to be a battle for Strasbourg, where the French super heavy tanks would be tested directly into urban warfare. They would prove extremely effective in urban warfare, as the Germans are not willing to use artillery in the city and risk bombing their own citizens. For the same reason, airplanes carrying bombs would not drop them on the French super heavy tanks, as they can accidentally bomb their own citizens and lose war support. This would encourage the French High Command, led by Charles de Gaulle, who I assume in this timeline would be like Erwin Rommel, i.e. not sympathize with the ruling ideology, but want to serve his country. De Gaulle would be like Rommel in another sense of that he can become a tank genius and prove himself quite effective. Regarding the Battle of Strasbourg, the city would be besieged and supplies would be cut off from the mainland, so the governor would surrender the city as he feared that the super heavy tanks would flatten it. The Germans were still relying on older Great War tactics, and they didn't innovate too much. Still, unfortunately for the French, the German airplanes could destroy a super heavy tank, only if they drop a bomb directly on top of it. While this sounds easy, it's actually extremely difficult, so the Germans cannot reliably counter the French tanks. Moving on to the Eastern Front, I want to mention Poland. They can become like Francoist Spain of our timeline, trading with the Germans, but not joining the war directly. There are several reasons why the Polish people would want to remain out of the Second World War. First up, the Poles would have to fight the Hungarians, but the two countries are historical allies. For example, in our history during the Second World War, the Hungarians didn't attack the Poles in late 1939, despite them being allied with the Germans. Obviously, this wasn't a big problem, but this just served as a nice gesture between the Poles and the Hungarians. This alliance between Poland and Hungary can even be observed today. This is the first reason, but the other reason is that the Polish people would be split on the issue. One side would want to join Germany and gain all of Belarus as compensation, which can be repopulated by Poles, especially the ones who reside in Germany. The other alternative is that Poland, which is a free nation, although heavily influenced by the Germans, can switch sides and join the Russians, in an attempt to gain the before mentioned Polish majority lands in Germany by force. This would however make Poland allied with Russia, who is vocal about retaking their previous territories and even reaching new heights. This is why Poland would be hesitant to join the war, so in the first few months they would remain out of it, but trade with the Germans. The Russians are not going to attack Poland, as they would prefer to deal with the Baltics and pacify Finland first. The United Baltic Duchies would be the first target of the Russian army, as these Baltic countries are very weak and prone to collapse. This is because of the heavy Germanization program, where the Germans are basically colonizing the region and suppressing the Latvians, Estonians and Lithuanians. These Baltic people would obviously not like it, so they would be at a crossroad. They can rebel, but this would mean that the central government collapses, making it easy for the Russians to invade all of it. Then the fate of these people would be in the hands of the Russians, which they do not remember fondly. The other alternative is that Germany is asked to pull out of the United Baltic Duchies, and these countries can still be aligned with the Germans, but have their own separate states. At this point, the Germans would have no other option but to agree with this demand, as they failed to see the cracks in the United Baltic Duchies and how much its people desired independence. This is why the United Baltic Duchies would split into 3 countries, with Germany still occupying Riga for the time being. To the Russians, however, this would be a welcome change, as they can easily conquer the region. This is because in the United Baltic Duchies, German was the main language, and all of the other languages were a secondary language. Thus, with the collapse of the United Baltic Duchies and with the formation of Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania, these people would have a sense of pride, so they would use their own language instead of the German one. The problem is that these languages don't have a lot of things in common, so communications between these troops on the front lines would be limited, as they're too proud to use their own language, rather than the German one. This is why I believe that sooner or later the Russians are going to steamroll the Baltics, due to poor communication and political instability on the enemy side. I would predict that in this situation only Lithuania would hold, for now. As for Finland, Russia would aim to push the Finns away from St. Petersburg, but not aim to capitulate the country, as the cost is not worth it. Since the war started on the 1st of January, you already know how this winter war would go for the Russians, but eventually, after suffering way more casualties than needed, the Russians would occupy some land and redistribute their soldiers to other fronts. Since Kiev is right on the border with the Russians, the city would be bombarded easily and eventually would be taken, as Germany cannot spare enough forces to be everywhere all at once. The Germans would ask the Poles to use their railroads to get to Ukraine faster, which would be granted. The Germans know how important Ukraine is for Russia, as if Ukraine were to fall, this would directly link Hungary with the Russians, where the Hungarians as of right now are disconnected from their allies and have no sea access from which they can get help. As for the Hungarians, I assume that they would control Burgenland before the war starts. So, the Austrian capital city of Vienna is just 25 kilometers or 16 miles away from the Hungarian border, making its capture inevitable. I want to quickly mention Japan, which is more than likely to join the side of the Axis of Revenge, seeking to take the German Pacific Islands, Qingdao, but also the eastern parts of Papua Island. I will not cover this front too much, but remember that it's happening. I think that the United States and other countries can at this point embargo Japan, and by extension the rest of the Axis of Revenge. Zooming out, this is the situation as of right now. Strasbourg has fallen and the super heavy tanks of France are paying off, with Finland not being a threat, and Russia occupying most of the Baltics, but also just starting to enter Ukraine. As I mentioned, Hungary would be effective in taking Vienna, but would be cautious to go any further. Previously, in the comments, people have said that the Germans would win very easily, but as you can see from what's happening on the front lines, they were caught by surprise, fighting against a weapon that they cannot counter effectively. This is not to say that the Germans are going to perform poorly by any means, but their enemies are more prepared for the war. The Axis of Revenge also has the advantage of starting the war at their own terms, way before Germany is effective in their mobilization efforts. This war came to Germany as a lightning from a clear sky. Still, Germany will militarize the border and hold effectively, preventing any further enemy advances. The Germans are going to focus on Belgium, sending many of their tanks to the region, with the goal to capture Paris quickly and then to focus on Russia. These tactics are almost identical to the ones in the Great War, so the German war mentality is still one of almost 2 decades prior. The Germans will defend Belgium but would neglect the Ardennes forest. This is because they thought that the terrain was impossible for the French super heavy tanks, so they wouldn't need a lot of resources to hold there. The Germans also believed that the major city of Lille was the next target of France, which is reasonable to assume so. The French lost Lille to Belgium in 1916, after the Great War, and would want to retake it for a morale boost. The French super heavy tanks are also quite effective at urban warfare, as it was shown in Strasbourg. so Germany will fortify the city and wait for France to start their advance. If you got the subtle hint that the Germans would neglect the Ardennes forest, as they didn't think that the French could march super heavy tanks through there, you will know what's coming next. France will do exactly the opposite of what Germany had expected and march through the Ardennes forest, putting many of the German armored divisions at risk of being encircled. This would obviously panic the German High Command, who was again caught off guard. Not so long after that, France will complete their encirclement and would reach the border of the Netherlands. Another cool detail is that Dunkirk would be in the hands of Belgium at the time, so the Germans could practically get Dunkirked in this alternate timeline. The French would then focus on assaulting the encircled divisions in Belgium, hoping to take much of the German tanks for themselves, but also to prevent them from escaping, which would greatly weaken the German army. Cracks are starting to show in the Wehrmacht, and if anything is not done fast, they can lose the war before it has even started. Right now, Germany doesn't have a lot of options to secure their encircled troops, as they can request that the Netherlands allow the Germans to escape through their railroads, but despite the great relations between the Dutch and the Germans, this request would be too much, as then the Netherlands would be the next on the chopping block. The last hope for Germany is Britain, where the two countries would have favorable relations. This is because Britain is led by the Labour Party, which is a social democratic party. The Germans are led by the SPD, which is also a social democratic party, making the two countries very similar in terms of ideology. The British are also opposed to the far right, and even the National Socialist Party of Britain would get repressed. Now you may think that Britain and Germany would be on bad terms because of the Great War, but I don't think that this would be the case. Despite the similar political ideology between the British and the Germans, I don't think that the British would hold a grudge against the Germans. This is because the only British lands that Germany directly annexed were Uganda and Kenya. Britain was Gibraltar as it was given to Spain, Malta was given to Italy, Cyprus was given to Greece. Ireland fought a war to become a dominion, South Africa fought for its independence, and Brazil took British Guyana. Germany as of now is not allied with any of these countries, so the British I think have no reason to hold a grudge against the Germans. And even if they declare war on them and are guaranteed to win, they can only retake Uganda and Kenya. But of course they would expand some more, but this is besides the point. The British and Germans can also have a shared enemy, which is the Japanese, who aspire to dominate Asia and rival British India, Australia, New Zealand, Malaya and Hong Kong. I cannot tell you if the British would help the Germans by safely escorting the German troops out of Dunkirk, so this is up for interpretation. Let's say that most of the German army gets crushed by the French, so France has almost captured all of Belgium. It should go without saying, but this is not meant to be taken seriously, remember that, especially during the end of the video. I just want to make the most interesting scenario possible. This is why I will literally nuke the fridge and make the scenario more interesting, but sacrifice some realism. Keep in mind that I'm planning to do all endings Kaisertum to explore all possible endings. This is just one of them. I am yet to mention Italy, which has a personal union with Illyria. The Italians have a lot to gain from this war, but not in the terms of uniting the Italian speakers, which they have already mostly done. I think that Italy can choose to strike the Salonika Pact, with the goal to expand Illyria at the expense of Bulgaria. But also, Italy has the Dodecanese Islands, so they can expand into Crete, and perhaps Italy can take Corfu and Albania, securing control over the Adriatic Sea. I would say that while every major European country except Britain is busy fighting each other, the Italians would choose to strike the Salonika Pact, which would be caught off guard. The Romanians I don't think would be too interested in fighting in this conflict, as there is nothing for them to gain, and they risk suffering a lot of casualties, rather than protecting the border with Hungary, who is increasingly more likely to strike Romania. This would put the Romanians into a position where they can abandon the Salonika Pact and fight on the side of the Germans, or to help the Salonika Pact and fight Italy, but risk a war with Hungary. Since the Germans are lacking major military victories, I think it's fair to say that Romania will stick with the Salonika Pact, who would be in deep trouble. The Salonika Pact I assume would quickly lose control over Serbia-Montenegro, either due to rebellions or simply to Italian invasions. The Italians are also going to start harassing the Greek coastline, so the war is looking dire for the Salonika Pact. The Turkish Sultanate is a German ally, although not officially in the war, so them helping the Italians is not too plausible to happen. But if you play the Hearts of Iron 4 mod of this series, you can definitely expand the Turkish Sultanate. Still, these two wars would be going on in parallel, but I assume that they would soon merge. Italy would be kicked out from the German customs union, while also the Germans have good relations with the Salonika Pact. The problem with the other alternative, which is the Italians join the Germans, which is not a big problem, but the Salonika Pact joining the Axis of Revenge is not possible. This is all because of Transylvania, as the two rivals of Hungary and Romania would have to fight on the same side, hence why I think that the Salonika Pact would prefer to join the Germans, and Italy will cooperate with the Axis of Revenge, but not join them officially. Additionally, Italy and Hungary would border each other, making the front lines a lot more interesting. The Italians are also willing, in case of victory, to establish an Austrian protectorate, greatly expanding Italian influence and making the country a formidable major power. This would give us these sides of the war, which makes more sense. Italy would offer Hungary all of Romania as an alternative to the Croatian coastline, which I think would be accepted by the Hungarians. As for the Balkan front, the Salonika Pact would be on the defense, and they would lose more land, as Hungary is retaking most of Transylvania, while Bulgaria already lost Serbia-Montenegro, and it's looking increasingly more likely that they would lose Macedonia, which can become disastrous for them, the Greeks and the Albanians. At that point, I think that the Italians would have a successful naval invasion of Albania, where they would reach Tirana and force the king to abdicate, where after that an Italian would be put on the throne of Albania. Thus, Albania would switch sides and not lose any territory, and they can even gain some more from Greece and Bulgaria. This is why I think that Albania would enter a personal union with Italy and be forced to switch sides. Now it is time to mention Britain again, who now has the opportunity to retake Malta, but also quite a lot of French colonies. Going further, as Japan is a threat to Britain, the British can potentially join the Germans and also have gains from Japan, so the British entry into the war on the German side is looking increasingly more likely. I cannot tell you what the canon event would be that would make Britain join Germany, but to me under these circumstances it looks inevitable, so I would allow it right now. Egypt joining the opposite side as to regain the Suez Canal is possible, but for now I think it's too unlikely. The world has a lot of opportunities to become crazy in terms of this alternate Second World War. South Africa would be greatly angered at this, as they hope for Germany to go to war with Britain, just so South Africa can expand into the Dominion of Natal. As of right now, South Africa would remain neutral, despite them being a German ally. At the same time, Poland would be inevitably invaded by Russia. The Polish people know that the Russians want to incorporate and annex them into their Neo-Russian Empire, so there is no point between a Polish-Russian cooperation. As to mention some other countries, the United States would prefer to stay out of the war, but they would continue to trade with the Europeans. Portugal and Brazil have good relations and have been increasing cooperation between the two. As of right now, they are also not threatened, so they will remain out of this war. The interesting fact to mention is that Portugal is a German ally, being in the German customs union, but also having a member of the House of Wettin on the Portuguese throne. This is interesting because Portugal was also anti-British at the time, entering and losing the Great War because of them. But now, with this British-German alliance, the Portuguese and Brazilians would damage their good relations with Germany, securing more neutral countries. Still, this alternate Germany is a force to be reckoned with, as they would prevent France from advancing any further and to establish defensible positions. The strength of the French super heavy tanks is now limited, as they're good on the offense, but due to terrain and rivers, there is nowhere to go. Again, let me remind you that this is unrealistic, but I'm building an exciting story. This is why, as to spice things up, I think that France would want to bypass the German defenses and attack the neutral Netherlands, where the French would have a really big advantage. Remember that the French super heavy tanks are very effective in urban combat, so they can easily take the Dutch major cities and bypass the German defenses, going straight into the Rhineland if all goes well. This is a big gamble, but one worth taking. The war is still anybody's guess, but there would be something very massive. The thing that I'm talking about can potentially change the course of the war and maybe the entire world. Earlier in the video I mentioned that Germany could destroy the French super heavy tanks only if they accurately drop a bomb from an airplane on top of it. This is extremely difficult to say the least, as the airplane is moving at a fast speed, but they also have to hit a moving target accurately. This is not reliable, and only 0.4% of the bombs dropped would connect successfully with the French heavy tanks. This is why the German top priority would be to make something that is more efficient in destroying the French super heavy tanks, on which France basically relies to win the war. Since the Germans won the Great War, they never became ultranationalists themselves. So all of the top scientists never went to the United States of America. There was no brain drain in Germany. Historically, a lot of German scientists worked on the Manhattan Project, and I think that Germany could have a similar project in this alternate timeline. But it wouldn't be aimed at wiping out entire cities, but just a tank and the surrounding infantry. Being smaller in scope is perhaps easier to achieve, and although perhaps unrealistic, I want to mention it. This is because Einstein and Oppenheimer perhaps never go to the United States of America and would do research and development in Germany instead. There would be a prototype with a blast radius of just 100 meters, or the rough diameter of a football field, which would be first dropped on the French super heavy tank divisions advancing into the Netherlands. This prototype would take 2 months to build, and was able to take down 4 French super heavy tanks, making it extremely cost effective. This is because Germany can build more of these and destroy tanks faster than the French can produce new ones. The war is starting to shift with the discovery of atomic energy, which once again I don't care if this is super realistic or not. I am suggesting that an atomic bomb literally 1000 times smaller than the one used historically in Japan is dropped, which seems doable with all the German scientists back home, despite the year being 1932, while progressing into 1933. Yet again, the war is looking without a clear winner, as Germany managed to find an effective counter to the French super heavy tanks, who were bringing havoc upon the Germans and were enjoying easy victories. The war is not yet lost or won by either side, but I'm curious what you think. Go down to the video description or the pinned comment and vote regarding which side you think would win in this alternate Second World War. I will not do the most voted option, I simply want to see what you guys think. While you're down there, make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out the next episode, where we shall see who the winner of the Second World War is, as this video is already getting way too long. Watch the video on the screen and I wish you the best day possible. Goodbye.